Have you ever given in the temptation to press this button, touch something labeled "Do Not Touch," or blow into a mysterious whistle with an ominous warning written on it?
No, whether it was like a haunted situation or an alarm situation, absolutely not. I've seen too many horror movies, and I'm too worried about drawing that kind of drawing attention, getting arrested.
Yeah, very much same. Raised too hard on horror movies.
Ghost in
Just
jail,
can't.
kind of the mood killers in that sense. So that's probably the correct answer. No temptation to do it though. Not even like, what if?
I think I gotta say no.
You guys are
I'm
pure.
a very boring person.
Rarely, if ever, for even a second.
I'm like genuinely afraid of most doors that say exit because I'm positive that I'm gonna set off a fire alarm. Like I just avoid.
Do you trust push
Like,
pull
I can-
signs?
No, never. No. Always bracing for the door to come both ways.
Right. Yep.
I just relate so much to the protagonist of Whistle and I'll Come to You, except for like the central event, except for the fact that he like invites the spirit. I would never in my life do what he does. I very much relate to the bumbling around and the dorkiness. But
He makes a few questionable decisions.
What he does. I mean, not to spoil the plot here, but
We'll get into it.
Yeah,
first.
I would be very excited about finding the whistle, but I would not blow the whistle.
Oh, I'd put it back.
I would put it back. Be like, look at the sick whistle, and then back it goes.
even at its horror, this is pretty early horror, and still, it relies on stuff that I just can never imagine doing. Obviously there's so many cliched examples of, why didn't they just leave the house, et cetera, et cetera. To the point that it's been parodied to death, and even here in 1890 or 1908 or whenever these were written, I probably should look that up. It relies on some like professor or some other academic or some priest or somebody doing something completely asinine, like reading a cursed book or blowing a cursed whistle or looking for cursed gold.
Mm-hmm.
While leading the most leisurely lifestyle possible. Just hanging out, having great meals by the seaside, reading cursed books.
And that's classic too.
Can't not
being
summon
a
a demon.
skeptic and being that's classic too. It's a classic type of character, obviously, if it existed even then. A guy who's like, well, obviously it's not going to happen. Obviously, the supernatural doesn't exist. And if it did, obviously it's going to happen to me. Obviously it's not going to happen to me.
Hello and welcome back once again to Split Picks. We are back for the first time since October Horror, but we have not quite shaken the horror out of the show yet. We're being haunted by the Christmas spirit today. We're going to be looking at some BBC Christmas ghost stories today. I'm really excited about this one because I had never heard of these before the two of you started talking about it. So these have been a blast to watch. I'm being joined today by, as almost always, Bennett Glace. Bennett, how you doing?
Yeah, and you feel that it's a spooky chill in the air, an especially chilly spooky chill in the air. I'm doing good, Craig.
Good, glad to hear it. We are also being joined by Zach Fleming. You may know Zach from October Horror because Split Tooth had a great interview with Zach about his new short film, Mickey Dogface. If you haven't had a chance to watch it yet, just put us on pause. Go watch it. It's like 17 minutes? It's a blast. You'll love it. He produced the short film In the Flesh and Dark Moon. And in the commercial world, he has produced works for some brands. But Zach, I hear you may have had a Christmas semi-run-in with the big dog Hallmark. Would you like to tell us a bit about what happened there?
So this was a spot for Zola, the wedding website, and the spot was basically three couples at the altar saying their vows intercut, but the vows are just Zola website things, like just selling points for the company, basically. And one of the three couples in the spot happened to be two women, and it aired on Hallmark. And I guess this group called 1 Million Moms got really upset about it and emailed and just like posted this whole kerfluffle about it, to the point where the CEO of Hallmark pulled the spot off of the air, which caused even more people to get mad at Hallmark than were mad at them in the first place. And this was in like 2019, so like I looked up the article about this to refresh myself because I was like, what even happened again? And it's great because at the bottom of the article, it's like, Ellen DeGeneres is mentioned as one of the celebrities who got mad at Hallmark over it, and it's like, oh, it's before everyone knew for sure that Ellen was terrible.
Different times.
But yeah, but basically a month after that happened, the CEO of Hallmark stepped down and someone else took over. And then I think then Hallmark has done a bunch of queer Christmas movies, like really cashed in.
Yeah, they have. Yeah,
so a really funny arc.
Yeah, for sure. Do either of you watch Hallmark at all?
Not as a habit. I've seen them as like part of some like random bad movie night watches, which are always very fun with a group. But I've seen clips from some recent like Dolly Parton movies that seem like they would be worth a watch.
No, I've never. I honestly, I don't think I've seen a single Hallmark or Netflix, obviously, and I think probably some of the other streaming services have made their own sort of industry out of it, out of the genre. No, honestly, I mean I'm kind of boring with like my Christmas classics, like what the stuff I watch every year. I mean, some of these BBC Christmas stories have become those for me.
Bennett, you recently wrote about Whistle I'll Come to You for Split Tooth, and you opened your piece with it about the line from It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year about, there'll be scary ghost stories, and that's a line that I'd never really paid attention to, but as soon as you pointed it out, it's like,
oh, really?
That is a weird thing that's
I was worried.
I
was kind of worried it was like a hacky bit to fixate on it, because like, I don't know, every time I hear it, every time I heard it for a while, I was like, what, besides like Christmas Carol, like, is that like a common thing? And then obviously when I learned about M.R. James, I learned that it was, he's just one example, and Dickens is just another, one example of this whole tradition of kind of telling ghost stories around Christmas, which I wish existed, more in the 21st century in the U.S. I don't really know of any examples recently besides, the two remakes of Black Christmas.
Oh, we covered those last
year. Which are both
year.
Underrated, honestly. I mean,
yeah, they're solid. Yeah, it seems like all Christmas stuff that I can think of that's American is slasher or. There's no like real ghost horror in the American canon and Christmas.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of some. I mean, obviously,
honestly,
Scrooged, but that's a
right. Yeah, the classic ghost.
Yeah,
Christmas
I guess
Carol,
besides the American adaptations of A Christmas Carol.
Yeah,
I don't know. It does almost feel like Christmas Carol is just like, oh yeah, Christmas Ghost. It's been done. Like,
yeah.
We'll just kill
like, well, you knew
people.
about these guys. They're back.
Yeah. But Bennett, what can you now tell us after this about the combination of ghosts and Christmas time? I mean, I think you found more than you were expecting, and
yeah. No, I mean, I was really excited when I found out about M.R. James that these stories were all, or many of his most famous stories were adapted by the BBC and aired throughout the 70s. Each Christmas. And when I learned that at least one of them got 9 million viewers, I thought that was pretty nuts. I mean, 9 million for weekly television, that would be good enough for like top 10 of last year, which is pretty crazy. And I know I've only read a few of the stories, the two here and a few others, and it's cool also that there was like a bunch of kind of horror anthology series, many of which aired around Christmas. I'd say unfortunately the kind of recent attempts to do it, the very few that I've seen, kind of stink. Particularly the adaptation of Whistle It All Come to You with John Hurt. Hey, I like elevated horror here and there. There's a time and a place, but it's everything you would expect. Kind of a more recent. It's about trauma type take on the material. Everything that's ambiguous is really explicit, and I don't know. John Hurt is no match for Michael Hordern. for an Oscar-nominated actor, Michael Hordern kind of wipes the floor with John Hurt as this guy, as Parkin/Parkins.
What a face on that guy.
Right.
So good.
So before we get too deep into him, why don't we just have you both introduce which film you picked quick? So Ben, you've mentioned you chose Whistle and I'll Come to You, which was technically before the series officially began, but I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, the story is called Oh Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad. They shortened the title, and this aired on a documentary series called Omnibus in 1968. So sort of a break from the series is the series tradition, of nonfiction storytelling. I think it's the first, literary adaptation they had done. They had, aired, and this was, I think it aired Christmas Eve or probably the weekend before Christmas, 22nd, 23rd, if not. And I don't really know I don't think anybody involved really did any of the actors involved really did any other notable kind of film work. But it's, I don't know, a lot of great faces. It's in many ways not an especially faithful adaptation of the story, which is interesting. The professor in the story is described as really precise of speech, and in the adaptation he's really kind of comically bumbling and he mumbles a lot, repeats himself. Really struggles to answer questions, a lot like, myself.
Hey now. And Zach, you selected The Treasure of Abbot Thomas. Do you want to just give us a little bit about why you picked that one? And
Sure, yeah. I picked The Treasure of Abbot Thomas from 1974 based on a short story from 1904. And I guess short answer of why I picked it is because it's the goopiest of the BBC ghost stories. And it has like cosmic horror Lovecraftian energy around it without being in that world. And I didn't expect it, and I really loved where it went. So yeah, that was why I picked it. Also very excited to have read the short story and see how different it is, because wow.
Yeah, they completely flip it around.
It's a lot better.
Wait, which one did you like more?
The film a lot better than the short story.
I would
really
agree.
Yeah, the short story was really boring, which I hate saying, because I really like A Whistle and I'll Come to You, My Lad, and I don't know, I hate to be a guy who's calling literature boring, like PU.
Yeah, no, thank you for saying that. It's truly a chore of a short story. It's just so dry. It's about all of the like decoding that's not interesting. It's just like, and I solved.
It's like 6 pages long, and it took me fucking hours.
Great.
Yeah, no, it seems like it should be the opposite, where it's like, talking about like, this is how I solved it should be interesting, but it's more just like, hey, look at the window, there's like a black streak. What if we wipe that off? Oh yeah, cool. Next scene. You know, it's like it moves a lot faster.
I don't even think I would have liked it if I hadn't seen the film beforehand. Like, that's how fucking boring it is.
Yes,
no offense.
Completely agree.
It took me 3 sittings to get through that one, but
R.I.P.
On that topic though, so I think these could be a tough sell for some American audiences because, Whistle and I'll Come to You is a 42-minute film. Do we want to call it a film or episode? Does it matter? Adaptation?
Oh, I like calling it a film because you can hear it on Letterboxd.
There we go.
That's usually my rule.
But it's
is it or is it not a film barometer? Is it on Letterboxd? Yeah. It's film.
It's a pretty liberal definition. Except I don't know. I hate most TV. I know there's a lot of like British TV that people really they fetishize, like Sherlock and such, that I've never been a special fan of. Yeah, I like this enough to call it a film. I hate to be that sort of snob, but hey, what are you gonna do?
Barometer number 2.
Yeah. I can't exactly change what I am in that respect.
Yeah,
but essentially, it is a 42-minute film that has 2 scares in it. I just think it'd be interesting to start about this by talking about the pacing of it, because it certainly moves at its own pace. It does not feel any obligation to rush. I can imagine a lot of people calling it boring and slow. So I'm just curious, do you feel the slower pace is a benefit for once it does finally have the scary moments? Or talk to me a little bit about how it's paced and, what the strengths and maybe weaknesses are of that.
It's almost like comical in how little happens for the first like 20-ish minutes of it, which I think is kind of crucial for putting us in the headspace of, your classic skeptic, somebody who really believes that nothing supernatural could possibly happen to them. And I think it's kind of, it's fun to spend time with, despite the fact that this guy's so insufferable, it's kind of fun to spend time with him. I think it's, it's funny that it's good character building. One of the things I like about, there's a little bit of this in Treasure of Abbot Thomas. But I don't know. I think it's a little funnier in Always Still Don't Come to You. Sometimes M.R. James will like say things like, people who have been to this part of the country can like fill in the description, or like, in Always Still Don't Come to You, my lad, he says like, readers who are more familiar with golf can sort of fill in the gaps here. I think he says a few things like that in Treasure of Abbot Thomas. I like that this is very, very different in the sense that it spends a lot of time with the character and really kind of like luxuriates. If this were like written out, all of this, it would be, very long descriptions. The dialogue would be, it would take pages worth of like, and him like repeating words. When he's arriving at the hotel, there's like 3 different like fades into shots of him kind of like crossing the screen to the hotel. Like the driving there takes forever, which, on the page, it's like 1 page and he's at the hotel. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously some of that is like, we spend time with, the opening credits, but even then he waits a long time for the proprietor of the hotel to come and like let him in. But I love that, it really kind of, lards on the spooky atmosphere, and I love that proprietor. He's like Alfred Hitchcock, he mumbles even more than our protagonist, the professor.
And while we're on the intro, I just wanted to read the first 3 lines of the short story because I've never seen this written before. I mean, this is how it opens. So it's a quote, and it says, "I suppose you'll be getting away pretty soon. Or now full term is over, Professor. Said a person not in the story to the professor of ontonography." It's like, wait, what? Said a person not in the story. I love that.
It's so funny. Yeah. I just imagine it's like you have to imagine like a Nintendo Mii or something. Just like a fucking like a blank face or something.
It's the strangest way to get into a story. I read that like 4 times. Like, what?
Because also they're now in the story,
right?
He just brought them up. They're there.
But they do kind of do a good job of having just background characters in the film who are just kind of, there. Like all the other diners who he like so awkwardly tries to avoid and then just sits as far away as he can.
It's funny every time to me too.
Oh yeah.
And that's something too. Like again, you see the same scene a couple times before anything spooky happens. You see him like eating alone a couple times. You see, him and the Colonel kind of disagreeing. It's a great adaptation in the sense that it has its own version of like most of the things that are great about the story. On the page, the Colonel is such a fun character on the page because he's really kind of like giving him shit out on the golf course and really kind of like laying it on about how he really does believe in the supernatural, and the professor is sort of you can tell just waiting to sort of start lecturing him, and golf keeps getting in the way. We should mention that there's an incredible scene in the story. Everybody should read the story. There's this incredible scene early on where like a professor just sort of makes like a completely innocent joke about the hotel. The professor finds out there's going to be 2 beds in his room. It was the only one he could reserve. A professor he doesn't especially like keeps saying, I could stay in another bed. And another professor makes some innocent joke like, maybe, he can help keep away the ghosts. And this Professor Parkins, it's different on the page in the movie, really just sort of starts fuming and like starts like yelling at him and really kind of like laying in that he considers it like an insult to academics like him to even consider that there's like the supernatural. So he's really setting himself up. If it was a movie, if he was in a movie here, there would be such like ominous music. And I don't know. I like that the filmed version is completely different in that respect. We have kind of an equivalent scene to that fight. but it's the professor really kind of like stumbling around and kind of like laughing at his own jokes and focusing on the food rather than really laying out his argument efficiently as the professor does on the page. But again, a singular kind of distinct version of something that's great in the story. Again, a perfect adaptation in that respect.
Zach, you mentioned he has a great face. It is so expressive.
So expressive.
I mean, he spends so much of this film eating. Like, there's like 3 or 4 different scenes where he's eating. I mean, what can you tell
real
us?
mileage out of a lot of napkins.
Oh, yeah. I mean, do you want to maybe just talk about him as a character? Because we learn so much about him just through eating and just like, the noises and faces he makes.
Yeah, all the clenching and like hunching, everything about like the way he moves and like his version of like hiking. Like just taking a stroll down like a sidewalk basically.
Trudge,
and he's like,
which is so so apt.
Yes, that's right.
Both for the atmosphere and sort of his way of walking.
Yeah,
you do learn a lot, both from like the fact that he sits alone and his whole posture, and I don't know, the muttering to himself. Especially, I think it's like toward the end, right before the haunting really begins in earnest, when he's like, "Oh, I told him I don't like tomatoes." And he's really, really like complaining. Very, very funny stuff. But yeah, I don't know. I think it says everything how much he's like focusing on the grapefruit or the soft-boiled egg or whatever it is, instead of like looking at the colonel as he's like telling him what an idiot he thinks the colonel is.
Yeah,
which is so great. And thankfully, he doesn't do any shots of like his mouth chewing. Like, we managed to have a lot of food in this movie and a lot of eating.
Yeah. No close-ups. Yeah,
which is always a plus.
So I think in one of his conversations with the colonel, he's talking about what he's planning to do the next day. And he's like, I'm going to go do this stuff. Where does he go? I mean, this is when the ghost stuff starts to come in. Do you want to maybe walk through how he gets there?
I mean, much like in the story, he walks along like the spooky beach. I think in the I think in the story movie, it's just he's kind of innocently walking home and stumbles on some sort of, I think, like Templar graveyard or something. But in the story, he is he's walking around a cemetery on a kind of a spooky ridge, and he finds this whistle sticking out of the ground. And he takes it back that night and kind of finds a spooky Latin inscription on it. I think in the story there's kind of an inscription that you're left to that's left sort of mysterious. Then it's also written in Latin: "Who is this? Who is coming?" And obviously not being familiar with horror cinema, he doesn't think anything of it, and being a skeptic, thinks nothing of it.
Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, but no one in their right mind would actually take something jutting out of a grave and then actually put it in their mouth, right?
That was something I've thought of, the whole time. It's really disgusting. Especially, again, he's described as so, like, neat and meticulous, and I just feel like that goes hand in hand with also being sort of sanitary in a general sense,
His disdain for the supernatural was so strong. He was willing.
He's like, yeah.
It'll be fine, right?
Fuck it, I gotta test this whistle.
So he does put said item in his mouth and blows on the whistle, and the wind starts to blow immediately, right?
Yeah, it's not especially dramatic, I don't think, in the adaptation, or at least not in this 1968 adaptation. I mean, it's you notice it, but I think in the on the page it's described as really being so intense that it like wakes up the colonel, and you hear him like stomping around, and the water is coming into the rain is coming into the professor's room, etc. This the professor notices it, but I don't think it really keeps him up at night. I think we maybe get one shot of him like waking up sort of disturbed, kind of thinking of the beach, but nothing too crazy at this point. We haven't gotten too supernatural. It's not, and it's not until the next morning when they start talking about the supernatural. I think the colonel, kind of out of nowhere to start the scene, asks if the professor believes in ghosts, and that kind of tease him up to start talking about how little he believes in the supernatural.
Mm-hmm. So this film does a great job with simplicity and subtlety. The first time we see the ghost, it is literally just a bed sheet on a beach. But it becomes so imposing whenever it's shown. I mean, do one of you want to try to tackle why this bed sheet is able to become scary because it's like it's so simple, but it's
so effective.
Yeah.
I was shocked by how effective I found the end beat in particular.
Yes.
I feel like it's because it's so uncanny. Like, I know it's a sheet. I know it's being done in such like a rudimentary way, but something about the motion and like the slow-mo of it that I just didn't expect to hit in something of like that feels like a period piece, and like that tonally up until that point has felt so straight, that as soon as it slowed down and that sound hit, I just like my stomach dropped. I was really not expecting it.
The stop motion is spooky. It's one of those things that's sort of always spooky, and it's really spooky to see here. Yeah, in what's very much not an animated film in the 60s. And it's, I think the fact that it's such an elemental sort of thing makes it a little spookier. I'm thinking of other examples of things like that are just sort of like kind of hokey, scary things that end up actually being scary. I'm trying to think of, are there other examples of that?
Yeah. Have you seen Black Sabbath? The Mario Bava short in that, A Drop of Water. There's like a puppet hand in that comes around a corner, and like in the same way, like my brain knows that's like a puppet hand on like a wooden arm, but like it coming around a corner at a certain time just like fucking scared the shit out of me. Like really, really got me. But very, very rudimentary and like, basic.
No, I mean, there's something that's just so profound about just those simple type of scares. I mean, the one that always gets me, it's also a Christmas horror movie, hooray, but the end of Black Christmas, it's like the house is empty, and everyone I watch with always misses it because they're like, wait, who was the actual killer? It's like, shut up, the phone is ringing. They didn't get the guy. Like, that's the scariest part of the movie. You're missing it. Like, that
terrifying.
Always gets me because he's just still in the attic. But no one knows or cares, and she's alone in the house with him. But oh God, that one's so good.
Yeah, it's perfect.
It's kind of, it's an obvious one, but in Changeling, or The Changeling, I think it's called, with George C. Scott, when the ball is bouncing down the stairs, it's parodied in Scary Movie 2 of all things, of all places. That's one that's really like, easy to imagine happening in real life, and very like, it's, even the sound of it is like a good effective jump scare.
Yes. Yeah. The performance at the end of Whistle and It'll Come to You also really sells that scare.
Yes.
Like, seeing him fall apart that way is very, very effective given what we know about him and how he's behaved the whole time.
Yeah, and that's like, it's like 85% of what we see during the scene too. We kind of get one shot of the sheet sort of rising off of the bed. And spend quite a while on his face as he sort of panics. And again, the sound is so spooky, both in the dreams and here. And the dreams are mostly right out of the story. Him kind of running down the beach and hiding behind these. I learned a new word reading this story, groins.
I had to Google that too.
Groynes. They're these kind of wooden. I don't know, what do you call them? Like pier type things that reach out and surf.
Like I've walked on a groin.
Yeah, me too, I think. Yeah. A concrete one, though, not a wooden one like this.
I typed it in on Google, and it was like, are you sure this is like a British word? You're in America. I was like, thanks, Google. That's why I'm Googling it.
But he dreams of kind of being chased down the beach by something, and hiding, eventually kind of crouching behind one of these groins, and he keeps kind of waking up and going back into the same nightmare, which is one of those things that only happens in like literature or in like movies, I think. But I mean, I don't know, I guess it could happen to people in real life. It's thankfully never happened to me. I don't think.
I did love how he describes the ghost in the story, because he talks about it as it appears as if it's running like super fast, but it's not moving. And like that was just like,
which is so scary. It's spooky to imagine. I mean, I don't know, that's always scary in movies, and something being far and just keep continually getting closer. I mean, it's it's a classic like Michael Myers scare. Always spooky.
Yeah,
it was scary in that Burger King commercial with the king in that guy's backyard.
Same exact principle.
That image though is just it's scarier in your head, because if you do that in a movie, it's just gonna look goofy because it's just gonna be like a cartoon like running in place, and it's like, okay, that's stupid. But I think they were very wise to omit the running and just do the like, because they barely show the ghost at all. It's like twice, and both times are like, oh, that was cool, and then it's done, and then you get him sucking his thumb. Like,
yeah,
come on.
Yeah. Other jump scare I just thought of, Bennett, you saying the approaching from the distance made me think of it. Have you seen The Innocents from 1961?
Yes, yeah, the
asleep.
sort of turn of the screw type. Deborah
Yes,
Carr.
exactly. Yeah, it's the turn of the screw adaptation with the script by Truman Capote, of all people. And there's a sequence in it where the kids are playing hide and seek with the governess, and she hides behind a curtain, and there's a window to the outside behind her. And as the kids are looking for her in like deep focus, someone, like, it's a very, again, a kind of rudimentary effect of like someone is standing on something with wheels, but you just see a figure like float forward out of the shadows, like face right up against the window, and she turns and looks at him, and it like full stomach drop, very basic, terrifying out of nowhere scare. So good. Highly recommend that movie.
I fell asleep. We tried to do 2 movies in a row, and I fell asleep. I'll get back
that's
to
fair.
it. This is an interesting pivot point, though, because we're talking about why the simplicity of the scary parts of this are so good. Bennett, you mentioned they remade this in 2010 when the BBC tried to reboot the A Christmas Ghost Story series, and I think the nicest way to say it is I was unmoved by the 2010 version. Everything is just so CGI heavy that nothing seems possible. Like, it's all just like, that's a computer. And I think there's something that is just so much scarier about, like, why did the bed sheet move that way? Like, no. It's just like, it leaves nothing to the imagination. Do you maybe want to just give us a quick little, maybe just your take on the 2010 version?
To quote television's Jay Sherman, it stinks. Sorry. I don't know. It fucking blows. I don't know if they had necessarily formalized, and I'm not sure if they still have. I don't know if I don't know if the BBC A Ghost Story thing is now a formal thing, but they're still occasionally adapting M.R. James stories, and I think this was sort of the first of the bringing it back.
It was, yeah.
There's a movie with Robert Pattinson called like The Haunted Airman that might be post this, might be pre this. I don't think it's an adaptation of a story, but it was also, I think, aired around Christmas. It's also spooky, scary. I watched a terrible rip of it on YouTube. Very dark. But anyway, this movie with this adaptation with John Hurt in the Michael Hordern role. I don't know. He's going on vacation kind of shortly after checking his wife into like an assisted living facility, like a memory care facility. Mm-hmm. She's got Alzheimer's, and he's pun intended, haunted by the decision when he goes on holiday. And then he blows the whistle. It's effectively the same.
But it was a ring, wasn't it? Like, he finds a ring.
Yeah, it's a ring.
And like, he whispers whisper and I'll come to you, my lad, into his wife's ear before leaving. It's like, what? It just didn't, there was a lot that didn't add up.
It's like played throughout, and he's like hearing it beforehand. It's all like prophesized ahead of time. And the ghost kind of looks like his wife. It's everything the original is not. It's very kind of overproduced and overwrought altogether.
Sounds overthought too. Like, that's written like the original was like missing some substance, that like we needed more context on his personal life, or like he needed a wife to die.
Definitely,
to interesting.
Yeah.
Like, no, yeah. I mean, like we said, the first one literally just says like, this guy that he's talking to is not important, as it introduces you to the lead character in the story.
Yeah, I mean, it was anti-subtle. I mean, it's like the ghost is literally outside his door, like shaking it, trying to get in. And he's just in bed like, I'm so scared. But like, I don't know. There's like a marble bust in the room of a face that he keeps turning around. but like it doesn't do anything. Like there were just so many things that were like, this could.
I should have rewatched it.
No, no, you shouldn't.
Yeah, I watched it like a month ago when I was writing the piece. It's obviously it's not as memorable as the original. I mean, before working on this piece that I wrote, for which I watched it like 3 or 4 times, I had only seen it one time, but it's one of those movies that, again, pun intended, haunts you. You know, it's very spooky. It's definitely one, folks, worth watching and returning to year after year this time of year.
Yeah, but the new one, like there's, the ghost talk kind of comes up at breakfast or dinner, whichever, and there's only one other person in the hotel. It's the proprietor, and he comes downstairs. He's like, I was so scared, like, oh no, there was no one here. And she's like, well, maybe it was a ghost, ha ha ha. And then he does the like, just starts speaking like M.R. James, like, oh, the odd chances that it could potentially be this, like in Old English. It's like, this doesn't fit at all. Like, where did this come from?
No, yeah, no, I don't know. The great joy of the original is how inarticulate he is, and I don't know. I'm not asking John Hurt to really try and do like an impression of the original performance, but if you're gonna like bring it up to the modern day, you can't have him talking like you can't have him talking more like the character in the M.R. James story.
Yeah,
unless like yeah, I don't know, because it's not like it spends time establishing that like he's that type of guy. Do you know what I mean? Like we don't get like 4 scenes. He's not like lecturing his cab driver like that. He's not, we don't get that initial scene that establishes that. We don't, he's still, a professor notably, and I think his wife was also a professor, but it's not like we get the original scenes of him like on campus that we get in the story, from what I remember.
I mean, I think my biggest issue with it is that they do everything to establish him as like a good, caring guy. Like, he's on vacation because he's taken his wife to this memory care facility, and they tell him like, hey, we're going to try and get her comfortable with this. We want you just to go away for like a week or so. Just, you need to get used to not having her home anymore. And he's just the whole time like, this is awful. Like, I can't believe this is happening. And then, spoiler alert, like the ghost is his wife. She breaks in or gets into his room through under the door and literally scares him to death. It's like, what? Like she goes, I'm still here, and then he dies. It's like, it's what? Like it doesn't like
and I don't know.
I didn't know what to do with that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't mean to sound like my monocle is going to fall out or something, but something I like about the original, the story, and obviously less so in the adaptation, is that it kind of makes it very clear that the professor survives this sort of thing, and it kind of plays it. M.R. James kind of plays it for a laugh. I compared it to the way Washington Irving writes about Ichabod Crane, sort of after the kind of getting chased off by the headless horseman that may or may not exist, and kind of becoming like an object of fun. The M.R. James writes something about the professor, becoming the sort of guy now who's like afraid of his own shadow and afraid of like the moonlight, hitting something the wrong way. I like that about it, and this is the opposite of that. It's so excessively dour.
So, in the story ending, it ends with him living, but he's terrified of everything from then on? I haven't read the full story, I don't think.
I got it right here. So I love the last paragraph because he's running through this. Then he says, there really is nothing more to tell, but as you may imagine, the professor's view on certain points are less clear-cut than they used to be. His nerves, too, have suffered. He cannot even now see a surplice hanging on a door quite unmoved, and the spectacle of a scarecrow in a field late on a winter afternoon has cost him more than one sleepless night. It's like...
That's awesome.
Right?
That's so much better than getting scared to death one time.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah.
He's a broken
and he does
man.
Sort of like a... And it's I think it's great in the original that it's much more like like it's like scarier, but or in the original adaptation. I mean, I like that it's like a little scarier, but this excessively dour version sucks.
Yeah.
But yeah, on the page, M.R. James makes it clear the colonel like throws the whistle out into the ocean or the sea or whatever it is, and I guess they light some sort of fire as like a ritual to kind of like ward off ghosts. I should have mentioned up top in the kind of like academic narration that Jonathan Miller, the director, does up top. I don't know. To me, he has like certainly not my read on the story. I don't know. He suggests that it might just be all in his head. He says something along the lines of like, it's like the isolated mind turned against itself, or when he forgets to consider the parts of his mind that he can't understand, or something like that. It very much suggests that it could be in his head, which M.R. James, I think, makes pretty clear isn't the case. At least everybody in the story definitely believes it was really supernatural. And even if the professor has become, a bit of a scaredy cat, I think they, I don't think M.R. James means to suggest that any of it wasn't real within the world of the story. And then as much as I don't like the more explicit version of the 2010 story, 2010 adaptation, I like that we have kind of these two versions, one where the horror is maybe a little more ambiguous, the nature of it is a little more nebulous, and one where we're meant to kind of believe that ghosts really exist.
Yeah, I mean, give me the bed sheet and that final freeze frame. Like, that conveys so much more about horror than a ghost going tee under a door can. It's just like, it's so goofy.
Awful. No, I really should have rewatched it. I really pride myself on my willingness to kind of watch and rewatch this sort of garbage.
Yeah, you don't got to do that, Bennett.
I don't. Pride myself is a strong.
Save it for
phrase.
next
I don't
Christmas.
Want to suggest that. Good lord, there's nothing worth taking pride in about that. Good lord. Hey, Christmas isn't here yet. I've got days to keep shoveling. I'll still keep drinking that garbage.
We got time.
Well, do you guys have other horror movies that you make sure to watch every year?
Christmas Horror Elves is one that I come back to yearly.
I don't know.
Have you seen that one?
No.
With Jan Haggerty?
No, never seen it.
It's a doozy. It's definitely not good. It's like a little meaner than your average SOV, but it's so insane, and there's so many fun things about it that it's become a yearly rewatch.
Wait, is this the one where the IMDb description is a woman finds she is part of a Nazi breeding experiment with elves to create Superman?
Correct. Yep, that's the elves I'm talking about.
I'll be watching that.
Which, kind of a spoiler, the Nazi stuff doesn't hit till like a ways in. Like, a lot of insane shit has happened, and then they're like, oh, the elves are part of a Nazi thing, and you're like, pardon me?
Of course they are. We watch Black Christmas every year. That is, I think, my number 2 favorite horror movie behind Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I mean, that's one I can watch anytime. The Hollywood Theater, we are blessed that just about every year, they show Silent Night, Deadly Night on the big screen, and it's a sellout every year. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it. It was last night, and I couldn't go. Silent Night, Deadly Night 5 actually is worth your time. Mickey Rooney.
Is that the one with Joe Petto?
Yeah, Mickey Rooney plays a toy maker named Joe Petto. That's all you need. If you're not sold, get out of here.
I have seen that one.
It's fun.
That's the one with Screaming Mad George worked on that one, right? Did I make that up?
Sounds like a thing. I'm not sure. I'm terrible with names, but
that's the one where the son. It's a Pinocchio killer, right? It's like a human doll man.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a great one. I love. It has like 7 names. Dial Code Santa Claus.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I still need to see that. I've never seen it. I've heard great things. I know there was a piece about it on the site.
Yeah,
it's really good.
I wrote that one.
Also
Bennett.
rougher than you'd expect.
Oh yeah.
Like, I was surprised.
No, it's like Rambo as a kid doing Home Alone before Home Alone.
What if Rambo was a small boy?
Yeah, and a millionaire and had any toy he wanted.
I watched P2 the other day on Tubi. I don't know if you've seen that one. P2 with Wes Bentley. Wasn't especially great, but there was some Elvis.
That's one of those like
super
tacked on horror Christmas movies where it's like they like. I haven't seen.
There's no real reason it has to be set at Christmas,
right? It's like very nominally like they pass.
It's just a reason why like no one else would be there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bennett, you wrote about Christmas Evil a few years ago.
Oh, that's a great one. Yeah, I love that one, and I've watched
that
many a year. Because that's that's a 5-star movie. I gotta watch that again so I can give it the old upgrade on Letterboxd.
It's-
I shouldn't be doing free advertising for them. I'm sorry. You can like bleep that out if you want, or we could say I shouldn't be doing free I need to give that 5 stars on that movie app.
No, you should use a censor bleep every
there's
time
take
someone
two.
says Letterboxd.
Or any brand name. I don't know. I don't want to do free advertising.
Yeah.
That'd be great. No, that is a dark one. I like dark Christmas horror because sometimes it's just like, oh, it's fun. They all still had ham at the end. It's like, all right, come on. But like Silent Night, Deadly Night, it's one that people misremember because everyone's always like, oh, it's so funny. Like there's the sledding scene where he says naughty. But like we took some friends last year and I kind of gotten to that point where it's like, it's so much fun. Like everyone's like fully participating with it. But then it's like, oh, I forgot how seriously dark and deranged this is. Like, they kill the kid's mom, like, early on, like, both parents. Like, ooh,
It's a really brutal opening. And then it takes its time, like, just building and being, like, kind of a huge bummer for, like, roughly an hour until the kills start. It is great. Like, the grandpa's whole opening monologue.
You've been naughty, kid.
Versus the second one, which just does like the supercut of 1 plus insanity.
Yeah, garbage day.
Huge tonal shift, which maybe accounts for people thinking 1 is fun. Or 1 is exclusively fun, right? Because like 2 turns it into the fun clip show, and then you're like, oh, I remember all that fun stuff from the first one.
Yeah, that could be.
I'm not sure if I've seen either. I've definitely never seen 2, though I've heard all about it. I've heard of Garbage Day, of course.
Yeah.
It's parodied in a few of the Motown movies.
Okay, watch that before the 2010 Whistle and I'll Come to You, Bennett. No, that one is a classic.
Yeah, no, I of course watch Christmas or Black Christmas. I own the 2006 Black Christmas on Amazon, unfortunately. So I'm gonna work that into the yearly rotation.
It was cheaper to buy than rent, wasn't it? I think I did
It
this.
was one of those ones where it was cheaper to buy than rent. Yeah.
Did you see It's a Wonderful Knife this year?
I haven't. No, I know that's no, not worth it. Yeah,
Probably the worst thing I've seen this
seen
year.
a few. Not so.
Hey,
Like,
wait until you watch
not
this one.
even
I'll
fun.
come to you from 2010. Zach.
It can't. No. Because It's a Wonderful Knife thinks it's cute. I'm positive that the 2010 Whistle I'll Come to You does not think
No,
it's
it
cute.
thinks it's smart. That's almost
It
worse.
thinks it's I was gonna
That
say it
is
thinks it's like
maybe
smart.
more
It thinks it's
poisonous,
insightful
actually.
and very very literary.
Yeah, no.
It's the movie equivalent of like a bubble pipe.
It's a movie you don't want to hang out with.
Yes. On that note, why don't we take a quick pause? We still got the Treasure of Abbot Thomas to get to. We're going to take a little break, and we will be right back looking at the BBC Ghost Story for Christmas from 1974.
Wait. Who is this? Who is coming? Huh? We shall blow it and see.
So the Treasure of Abbot Thomas was the 1974 BBC Ghost Story, and in the time between these two, the series had kind of grown into like an annual tradition. This one is directed by Lawrence Gordon Clark, and he also directed The Stalls of Barchester, A Warning for the Curious, which many people think is the best of the series. Lost Hearts in 1973, and then after this one he also did The Ash Tree and The Signalman, which is my personal favorite of the series. That one is a Charles Dickens story, really interesting about a tunnel signal operator, and he sees a ghost with no face. It's good.
So good. It's so good.
Yeah. I meant to bring this up earlier, but the BBC got in some trouble in the 90s when they showed a movie on Halloween called Ghost Watch. This is something that Brett wrote about for Split Tooth, I think last year for October Horror. And I just want to bring this up quick because Ghost Watch is, I think, probably a top 25 horror movie for me. And they played it as if it was happening in real time with real ghosts taking over the airwaves in a story that The Conjuring 2 later used. You've both seen Ghostwatch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's top 10 for me. I watched it on my
So
computer
good.
one time in the dark in like my old basement apartment, and I was so fucking scared. At the time, I was like, "This is the scariest movie I've ever seen."
But could you imagine seeing it, also thinking like,
Oh, God,
this is
yeah.
happening?
Well,
Not to mention,
Speaking
like,
of shitting your pants, yeah.
yeah, oh, absolutely. But also, the first time I watched it, I didn't have the context that it was actual BBC like news people in it.
Yeah.
So like, imagine having seen these people only exclusively do the news for like, you know, the majority of your life.
Yeah.
And they're appearing
Yeah,
in this
yeah,
like
all of the people are,
mockumentary
like, playing
live, like
themselves. Yeah,
amazing.
crazy.
That is an
I mean,
incredible
no wonder
movie,
so many
but-
people were fooled.
Yeah, but there were serious consequences because, you know, there were people who killed themselves because they thought there were ghosts in their house, and there were, I think, tens of thousands of phone calls going like, what the hell is happening? And so they kind of disowned it for a very long time, and I think it was last year they finally let a Blu-ray of it come out, and it's a fascinating movie and history. But you know, then they revived the BBC Christmas Ghost Stories in 2010, and it just got me thinking about, you know, horror for a general TV audience. It's just such a fascinating thing when you think of it. I mean, we have, like, you know, Netflix, like Black Mirror and stuff like that now, American Horror Story, that those have never held my interest personally. I think they're just a little too much and trying a little too hard.
I used to kind of like American Horror Story. I've watched probably 6 seasons, which is more than anyone should have watched. But for a while, I liked it because it was the one show on TV where honestly anything could happen, and you
Right.
can't really say that about every show.
No, I mean, I know a lot of people who love it to death, so I'm not going to say anything bad about it, but it's BBC, like, Channel 2, Christmas Ghost Stories. I mean, the thing I do like about these is that they rarely venture into kind of bloody territory. Like, I think The Ice House, there's like a decapitated head for maybe a second or two that you see, and that's about. Maybe Lost Hearts, there's a little bit of blood.
Yep. But it's like very stagey even then. It's like kind of
Right.
Yeah.
Heavy white makeup. It's like they're clearly, you know, ghost vampires
Right.
or whatever they are, and it's
Yeah.
not really scary. But I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about the best way to kind of approach mass audience horror, because you really can't go too crazy because you'll lose the, you know, more squeamish people, but you also don't want to be too tame because then people actually like horror are going to be like, this is lame. Like, what do you think is the proper approach for TV horror?
To be honest, I think they nailed it here. I think an adaptation of like a period piece is usually good for keeping you within certain, limits, content wise. You won't really like offend any sensibilities, and even if it's going to be spooky at worst. I don't think any of these is like really like especially scary. Besides Whistle and I'll Come to You, which is not really part of the series. I think this 70s series is mostly pretty. It's firmly in the spooky territory.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's usually good, and I think people like period pieces enough that's not like a hurdle for anybody. It being a costume drama, because like, you don't really have to have people speaking period appropriate language or anything like that. That might present a hurdle. So I think I think they kind of nailed it here. If you want to do mass horror for like something like television, I think it's usually like an adaptation of kind of like a old short story or like a sci-fi short story is usually the way to go.
Yeah. They also have kind of a cozy vibe where like or a comfortable energy where there's not really anyone at threat who hasn't directly earned it or like ventured into terror. Like, you know, there's no threat to the layman for like just existing.
Mm-hmm.
It's always brought upon the characters by themselves, so there's like an extra layer of comfort and safety there.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It suggests that like the skeptic was like almost right, basically. Yeah. There aren't ghosts unless you pick up the cursed book or the cursed pencil, or you go hunting for the cursed gold or what have you. But yeah, and also, I mean, this one, much like the Whistle and I'll Come to You, It's got a little bit more. It's got much more incident because they're trying to solve like a mystery, but it's similarly paced. It moves pretty quickly, or it moves pretty slowly, I should say, and it's really only like scary at the very end. And then again, like scary is kind of a strong word for what it accomplishes.
So really fast, I just want to open it up to either of you. Are there any of these BBC ghost stories that you think people should definitely check out that we have not mentioned yet? Because I really like almost all the ones I've seen.
I think they're all great. Is there any that we didn't mention? I mean, we mentioned A Warning to the Curious and Passion. I'd say, honestly, I think that's the one that's kind of like the scariest. Maybe like the grimmest to me. It had the ending where I was the most like, whoa. Um, Maybe Lost Hearts is the spookiest. Ghost Kids is always like
Yeah.
pretty spooky. I think that's a pretty easy sell. People like Ghost Kid stuff. They're all fun. They all have, like you said, kind of like a cozy vibe. They're good for like this time of year. I mean, that's a good way to nail the masked horror thing.
Yeah. They also all have very like abrupt and shocking endings, kind of. Like even when they're not real like gut punches per se, there's always sort of an abruptness to it that you're taken aback by, which is very cool to see. Like they spend so much time building,
Yeah.
and then it's like just kind of like a quick curtain pull at the end, and you're out.
It's like great for like keeping the viewer up at night. You imagine
Yeah.
like it really like filling you with adrenaline.
Yes.
So Zach, you selected The Treasure of Abbot Thomas. We mentioned earlier that the story is not the most interesting. Do you maybe want to just give us a backstory of what the story is about?
Yeah, absolutely. I really enjoyed it the first time I watched it, and I was struck by the structure of it on rewatching, particularly in the context of now having read the story.
Yeah.
So the story is exclusively about this professor basically finding in some historical records that there was an Abbot Thomas that had hidden his treasure somewhere on the grounds that he works on. He finds it and is cursed by it. And then he has his friend come and essentially put the cursed object of, gold or whatever it was back into the hole so the curse leaves him alone. And that's pretty much it for the short story. Very dryly told. It's all after the fact. And there's like, I think the spookiest thing that happens in it is like the narrator, when he goes to bed, the professor that he's come to visit had told him to lock his door. So he locked his door and it sounded like someone was trying to get in. And then, they felt like something was watching them when they were putting the gold away. And that's kind of it. And it's very dry, very long, very slow. But the film adaptation adds this whole layer where instead of refracting it through the professor and like one of his subsidiaries who like summoned someone to help him, it takes place before the hunt for the treasure has actually started. And you start with, I think it's one of his students whose mother is a widow, and she has these two mediums in her house who are trying to contact her dead loved one. And the student is convinced that they're scam artists, so he goes to the professor to prove them out as scam artists. And when he goes to visit the professor's reading about the Treasure of Abbot Thomas, and that spawns their kind of search for the treasure. The whole time the professor's like, well, I don't care about gold though. It's just for scholarly pursuits, which is such a great character foil, because it's so obvious that he wants the money the whole time, but he like pretends to be above it, and there's no hint of that or even really any like personality in the short story at all. To be brutal. So like extra impressed by the adaptation in that respect.
Yeah, no, it's this is like the best version of like a Da Vinci Code sort of a thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like a guy doing sort of like an academic mystery like this. This is like if Robert Langdon was actually like a charming character on the screen, like Dan Brown and Tom Hanks. So obviously wish he was. Not to shoehorn in Ron Howard here. But
The thing that I love most, I think, about the film adaptation that is also not in the short at all is they set it up so that the student has a realization about the riddle to push the professor into finding the treasure, while the professor is taking down the fake mediums and like being very haughty and like speaking in French and Latin and proving that the mediums aren't actually talking to anyone who's deceased. And the kid who had brought him there in the first place to do that is completely not paying attention, and they do it in this really cool way where every time they cut to the kid, it's a close-up of him thinking, and they use the very creepy folk orchestral music, kind of almost electronic tinged. The score for this is so cool, and it just cuts in every time you're with the kid as it's cutting back to this professor just like taking down the mediums. And at the end of that sequence, the kid is like, oh, I know what the next piece of the puzzle is. Like, has not even clocked the reason that he brought the professor there in the first place. And I just thought that was such a cool dynamic and way to push the story along and make it adds like a whole supernatural element that is, again, not there on the page as well.
The story is just a weird sequencing too, because it's like it's in 3 parts, and like the first 2 parts are like, oh no, your friend is ill, will you come to his aid? Yes, I will. And then he gets there in part 2 and he's like, I'm sick, will you help me? But no questions until you've done what I ask. And then part 3 is like, all right, so here's what happened. And it's just such a strange way to tell it.
It's like the least dramatic structure possible.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, go do a thing, come to me when you're done. And then the next part is, I did it.
Yeah.
Like,
it's like, how do I tell a campfire story? Huh.
And then they eventually go back and tell what he did. Like, he does tell, like, oh, when I went down there, this is what happened. It's like, why is this the structure? What does this add to anything?
Yeah. So
it's definitely not tension.
No.
It opens with a huge paragraph in Latin too, which sort of tells you
I
Yeah.
skipped
what
it.
to expect. No, I must admit I did not read all of the Latin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this one is definitely the least faithful adaptation, but I think that's to its benefit because it adds the student as a character, because it is just like the professor's partner, or like academic partner or whatever in the book.
Yeah, his friend who he hasn't seen in years or something. And like, yeah, I love the dynamic of the student, because I also get the sense, and this is maybe me reading into it too much, but that his colleagues don't like him very much. It seems like he does not have many friends or supporters.
Mm-hmm.
So he's just like working with this student who's the only person that will tolerate him.
Yeah. So you've mentioned the seance scene, but I'm just wondering why the seance would be added. Because like when I read this, it's like at no point did I think this is going to end up in a seance. Like, I'm just curious what you think that adds to the scene, because it is just so out of left field.
Yeah, I feel like it's touching on a similar thing to Whistle and I'll Come to You, like bringing up the protagonist's disbelief in anything supernatural. And adding sort of a layer of tension for as he starts to get closer to the treasure and like realize that it's cursed, of him being like, well, I don't believe in that stuff. I'm above it. We just proved that's all Boulder Dash.
This is a classic example of that sort of scene too. The kind of foreshadowing that a skeptic's skepticism is about to be tested. The sort of like seance that they prove is fake.
Down to like slapping the guy's back and the whistle pops out of his mouth.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, love that. As recently as Kenneth Branagh's Haunting in Venice or whatever it's called.
Fuck, I gotta see that still.
There's he disproves a medium during a seance, but then is forced to ask whether or not the supernatural is realer than he previously thought.
Yeah.
So Zach, you mentioned you love how the cosmic horror comes into play in this. And this is another one where nothing is ever too overt, but like everything from like the stained glass windows to like the bottom of the crypt when they're underground, just everything feels like it could be a trap or is haunted. I mean, how would you describe its style of horror? Because it has a few different portions where it's like things could go wrong, and it's just kind of, it keeps you on your toes.
Yeah, it gets surprisingly dreamy in quick flashes as it gets spookier. And like that reference to the God of Seven Eyes and the weird like cross object that's in there, like it all hints at something else that's definitely not Christianity or whatever the abbot was involved in. It's like some fully other thing.
Well, he was supposed to be like a bad abbot, right?
Yeah, he was an alchemist, so like an evil
That's
alchemist who was
right,
trying to make gold and made a deal with the devil so he could make gold. But it's also, do they say devil or is it just like evil? I feel like it's more ambiguous. Maybe I'm making that up.
I think they're kind of vague about it. Yeah,
right?
Wikipedia said devil, but take out the D, it's evil,
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, from there, like the manifestation of the curses also feels like a kind of cosmic horror to me, like this like non-sludge entity that he like briefly sees fall out of the hole, and that like haunts his room at night and is like kind of seeping under the door.
Yeah.
The goop under the door is so creepy.
It's awesome.
So creepy.
Very, very visceral.
And again, very effective use of just like seeing a dude so scared that it kind of creeps you out a little bit. Like he is very, very shook up.
I think he's a slimy hand too. For a
Yeah.
second. I actually haven't really read any Lovecraft or anything. I've seen the Stuart Gordon adaptations. I've seen his Masters of Horror episode. It's the Lovecraft adaptation. I've seen Dagon. I think is sort of a riff on some Lovecraft stuff. I like the sort of the way the horror is sort of represented here. I like the kind of druidic looking guy in the hood sort of at the end, or the sort of looks a little like a Jawa or something, which I like. But he's nevertheless pretty menacing as he sort of like kind of runs up. Not to spoil the ending for folks, you should definitely check these out. I mean, I don't know. I think even like knowing what was coming, I find the ending of these movies still pretty effective.
Same,
multiple,
yeah.
Rewatches.
Absolutely, because they're edited really interestingly too. Like the way the ending sequence of this is edited is very jarring in an intentional and cool way. Like, they leave him alone outside in the wheelchair as they see the doctor coming, and then cuts too wide and someone else is fast approaching him from a completely different side, and both he and the audience are like,
and there's barely time to be like, oh
Yeah.
It's
and
like,
then
just cuts it short of even
back
like a
to
frame.
Meadow and the creepy orchestral music. It's so good.
Ben, and I'm glad you mentioned Lovecraft, because my favorite thing about this one is that it does have that Lovecraftian ending where it's like, you're being followed by black ooze and sludge, but it's like, it made me think about why the story's told the way it is, and it's like, okay, just listen, just do me a favor before I tell you what happened, because it's like, if you tell someone, like, I'm being pursued by an evil goo from the curse of an alchemist, it's like, the hell are you talking about, you psycho,
Yeah.
And it's like, it just kind of hints at that horror that's like, what if it happens and no one believes you, And I think that is a good general audience type of horror, because it does give like, like what if I am, what if this does happen, but without being bloody?
Well, and if I recall correctly too, there's a little bit of ambiguity around what he finds in the hole. Like it initially appears to him as gold, but then when he's telling the student about it to get him to put it back, the student's like, did you find any gold? And he's like, no, it was just a bunch of rubbish. And it's there between them, and he sees it as like rubbish now, but the student POV is that it's clearly gold. So I feel like that's a really interesting, just like quick visual foil of like what is working on whom and like what is actually real in that moment.
I did like how they just kind of brushed over it too.
Yeah. And like you see the kid go in the hole or come out of the hole, but did he actually put it back? Or did he keep the gold?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, like there's little...
Yeah, because he just says like, he was an alchemist. Of course it didn't work.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it does beg the question of like, what if the greatest horror is just something that can't really be described? Like Lovecraft had the idea that the greatest horror is just like this color that you can't describe. Like no words will ever be able to describe it, but if you see it, you go mad. I mean, I love that idea.
Yeah, and such a specifically literary type of horror idea. Like you literally can't. I literally couldn't even describe to you how insane this is, because you would lose your mind.
Yeah, and that's another thing that we shit on modern horror a lot, but having everything just be so, HD 4K, like you're seeing everything in perfect detail, nothing left to the imagination. Like, I don't think that's a plus for horror in most things. Even, like Texas Chainsaw, we bring that up all the time. Like, there's no blood when he hangs her on the hook. It's like you fill it in, and that's when things get scary.
Right. There's also no like psychological attempt to explain why the Texas Chainsaw Massacre family is the way it is.
Yeah.
Like, oh well, they're that way because they had
biography.
really rough childhoods. It's like, no, I like the
Well,
what?
the remakes are very much like that.
Right,
There's,
exactly.
of course,
And there's
the famous prequel.
Right.
And again, both of these stories do kind of have a form of horror where it's like, well, if you just put it back, it'll be fine. Whistle will come to you. In the story, the colonel throws the whistle into the sea, and it's like he's not being chased by the ghost anymore, but he's still broken.
Just wanted to, and they even say, like, for the Colonel's best guess was, like, the worst this ghost could do was just scare him really bad.
Yeah.
And then that was the whole point, which is also kind of like a funny idea.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But also a terrifying idea. A ghost that's just there to fuck with you, you know? Whoa. Which I kind of believe in, you know?
Yeah.
If they do exist, which, by the way, what's your take on ghosts? You guys think they exist?
I'm gonna say yes. I feel like yeah.
Right?
I want to believe.
Why not?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I go both ways. I've certainly had my suspicions. There have been days it's like, what was that? But I don't know. It's like, well, what's the line from the Whistle and I'll Come to You? What's the definition of a ghost?
It's such a good bit. Yeah, and thinking you're being really like astute while you're just sort of going like is always a great bit. 100% of the time. If I have a complaint about Abbot Thomas compared to Whistle and I'll Come to You, it's always funnier to see incompetent academics and sort of characters in general than it is to see, for me at least, than it is to see guys who are competently like solving the puzzles and stuff. Now obviously this is a good example of that, you know, and there's a time and a place for both. But given the choice between the two, I'll always take a guy who's like, you know, a guy who's bumbling around.
But yeah, it seems like both of the adaptations take the endings or leave our characters in a place where it's like more heavily implied that they are dead or about to be dead or like fully ruined forever. Whereas both the short stories end pretty cleanly, like, and they were okay except they were freaked out.
Yeah.
Or I don't even think there's a reference to how he is much at the end of the story of Treasure of Abbot Thomas, right? It's just like, and then they put all the treasure back and that was it. I think it ends in Latin also, and I was like, oh, come on. Going back to Lovecraft for a second, I was really into him growing up, and then I realized that he was unfortunately very racist, super unfortunate.
Famously, yeah.
Famously really bad racist. I don't know how I glanced over the cat name as a teenager. I was like, oh, that's probably just a quirk. And no, he was just like a viciously racist, sad man who was afraid of everyone.
I would like to read more horror fiction in general. I mean, I read a lot of Poe growing up, as I think most, you know, people do. Maybe most people don't. I don't know. Anyone moderately spooky, at least, probably does.
Okay, I reread the last paragraph of the story, and this is interesting because it ends with the student talking to the professor, and he's talking about his journey taking the treasure back. And he says, you know, one thing I did notice in the carving on the wellhead, which I think must have escaped you, it was a horrid, grotesque shape, perhaps more like a toad than anything else, and there was a label by it inscribed with the two words, Depositum Custodi, and that is what translates to keep that which is committed to thee. So I'm wondering if that's supposed to be saying, like, he's being haunted only in his head, because he saw this thing on the tombstone or whatever was inside over the treasure, but I don't speak Latin.
Yeah, it's like, okay, cool. Thanks for the story, I guess.
I don't know. That one didn't do it for me. I really liked the
Really
Lost
did
Ark
not do
story.
it for me.
That one was good, but I
I
haven't
gotta read that one.
Yeah, Brett grabbed this book
Yeah.
and I immediately stole it.
Yeah, no, I was surprised by how much I didn't like it because I'm usually down for a good gothic ghost story, and it was just dry as dirt.
Yeah, it's a bummer. Well, we should probably get wrapping this episode up. Do either of you have any final thoughts on Whistle and I'll Come to You or The Treasure of Abbot Thomas?
I don't think I do.
Okay.
I think we covered great ground. This was awesome.
It's good. Okay.
Yeah, this is fun. Yeah, great to meet you, Zach.
Great meeting you too.
I would just say, folks, you know, these are really all on YouTube, as are most of, I mean, I think you can find just about every episode that was aired of any of these kind of BBC horror series. Dead of Night is the one where they deleted some of them. They just no longer exist, but you can see a handful of those. There's the series Beast, where they're all kind of like animal related. I watched a bunch of those.
Yes.
That one's great.
They're so good.
there's this one
During
where they're being,
Barty's
like-
party fucked me up.
Yes, I was just about to say, there's this one called During Barty's Party where they're being haunted by like rats, and that's another one where it's like ambiguous. I don't know kind of whether the rats are there. And I don't know. I love movies where like a DJ is a character and you're like getting sort of like storytelling through kind of the DJ's like patter and stuff. It's great.
Yep. You never see a
folks,
mouse.
check these out
It's
on
terrifying.
I think you can also probably buy DVDs of a lot of these. You know, hey, support the BBC wherever you live. I don't know. Is the BBC problematic at all? I guess bleep that if necessary.
Besides being British.
Yeah, right. Besides the obvious.
Actually, you know what? Let's do a quick pick. Let's put these two head to head. Which one are you taking? If you have someone over, you can only show them one. Which one are you gonna pick?
I take Whistle and I Come to You. I mean, I really do think it's like pretty singular. The performances are so great, particularly the central performance, and it has such a weird, spooky atmosphere, and it's the sound design during those kind of the couple scares you get is so distinct.
It's really incredibly done. Yeah.
A lot of kind of like weird, animalistic sounds that really kind of, almost like turn your stomach. The thumb sucking is really unique. As I mentioned in the piece, his hair kind of looks like Larry Fine-esque. I think it's really unique. It's one I can return to a lot. And it's kind of a shame that, as much as I love the other ones, it's kind of a shame there's nothing else. I wish Omnibus had done more as well. I wish there were more that kind of were aesthetically similar to that original adaptation. I wish they'd remade more well. It's a story that's worth adapting again. And even kind of like bringing to different time periods and stuff. That's not to say that I don't like Treasure of Abbot Thomas. I love Treasure of Abbot Thomas. One of the better of the other the 70s series for sure. Top 2 or 3 for me, I'd say, alongside The Signalman. And then Warning to the Curious is the other one I would rank up near the top. But Zach, what about you? Which would you pick?
Yeah, I mean, not to be boring, but completely agree. I feel like Whistle and I'll Come to You is classic. Very straightforward, but still surprising. Everything you said, basically, I completely agree with. I feel like Treasure of Abbot Thomas is more if you're looking for like a left field, but still great pick, assuming you haven't been spoiled by me talking through the plot so far.
Yeah, and the sort of like mystery format is fun. As much as I said I prefer a bumbling protagonist, the puzzle solving and sort of like, figuring out what Abbot Thomas meant with all of these like cryptic notes and stuff. That's sort of fun.
It's a fun cold watch.
It's like a better version of the adaptations of Da Vinci Code.
Yeah.
It's no Angels and Demons, but it's better than Da Vinci Code.
Yeah.
And way better than Inferno. Jesus. No, I say that as Inferno. Sorry, way better than Da Vinci Code. Better than Inferno. Excuse me. Let me change my emphasis there. Let me take 2.
I would agree. Whistle I'll Come to You is. I think The Signalman is my favorite of the whole series, but Whistle I'll Come to You is probably the one I would show people. Just that last scene is so unique. I mean, where else do you get the thumb sucking and then just like the friend coming in like, what's going on here? But like it's all done without. Do they even speak in the last scene? Like I think he just kind of walks in.
No, he doesn't say anything. He just kind of looks at him.
Yeah.
There's no resolution or reconciliation of any kind. I think if I was showing anybody any of them, I called Stigma sort of like a Black Mirror episode almost derisively earlier, but I think Stigma, one of the two that's based on an original story, is the one I might show anybody just because it's sort of it's set in the modern day and they unearth like an artifact of some kind. And then, I won't spoil the nature of like the curse that befalls one member of the family, but
I don't think I've seen
that's
that
one
yet.
that's
Okay.
like pretty visceral. It's a good one. It's on
really
YouTube,
good.
and I think it's worth checking out. And it's got just like a bleaker than bleak ending as well.
Yeah.
And it's just got like a good like structure. The premise of it just kind of like really pays out.
And like we were saying earlier, that both of these directors coming out of directing docs for years from BBC.
Yeah. There's some good stuff in these. It's definitely worth your time, and we'll probably wrap it up there. So, Bennett, as always, thanks for joining.
Yeah, of course. Hey, happy to be here.
Glad to hear it. Zach, thanks for joining. And hey, if you haven't watched Mickey Dogface yet, go. It's awesome. Just go watch it.
Thanks, guys. It's a pleasure being here. This is a lot of fun.
And Zach, you show like every other Sunday. You're showing
Yes.
like whatever you want. Right?
Yeah, if you are in the Brooklyn area, come to Spectacle Theater. I do Blood Brunch there every other Sunday, mystery meet horror movie, 3 p.m. And if you're into Kung Fu movies, alternate Sundays are mystery meet Kung Fu movie at 3 p.m. So come on down. And then, in general, while you're looking at the Spectacle, we have a lot of regular programming. It's really great. So support local theaters.
Yeah, he read some of the titles from that series. There's some good stuff in there. So go find it.
Yeah.
Yeah, your guys' horror programming is incredible. A lot of great stuff around Halloween, around Christmas. And
Yeah, I did
all
a
your
ton of the Halloween stuff this year. I like went too hard. I think I'm out of movies. Every like November, I'm like, I don't have any more movies to program. That's it. I'm done.
Well, thank you for listening. That's all we've got for the Christmas Ghost this year. There's some good stuff on Split Tooth right now from other Christmas horror, and we have some non-horror Christmas stuff too to keep everyone happy. So, happy holidays from all of us at Split Tooth. Thank you for listening, for reading all year. We'll be back shortly, and happy everything to everyone. All right, that's all for today.